Okay, so today's case is a very fascinating one. It is Sam Sheppard and the murder of his wife, Marilyn Sheppard. Crime of the century, trial of the century, just like OJ's was, but this was before OJ. Although there is a common theme between both of them, and I don't know if it's what you think it is. It is actually the lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, and we'll get more into that. You were thinking it was a domestic homicide. That's the connection, maybe. We'll get to that. So this happened July 3rd, 1954. Boy, this case had me thinking a lot the last couple of days. Going back and forth. I'll be honest with you. When I started this, I started with the police reports. And usually when you read a police report, what comes first is the crime scene. And then usually it's interviews. And that's exactly how this one was. Started with the crime scene. So I'm reading about the crime scene. I'm trying to visualize it. That's what you want to do. Visualize it. See, let it play in your head. And then I got to the first interview, which was Sam Sheppard. And I quit reading it after about 2 paragraphs. Because I was like, this guy is guilty. End of story. I left, came back, reread some things, and I'm glad I did. Certainly wouldn't have given up on it just like that, but it just goes to show sometimes, maybe, we'll see how this works out, that initial impressions aren't always correct. So, what happens? Let's first, like always, start at Victimology. Marilyn Sheppard. So, she was 31 years old. They had been together they were childhood sweethearts, so they were married, I think, for at least 10 years. Sam Sheppard was a doctor. He was in a family of doctors, meaning I believe his dad was a doctor and his 3 brothers were doctors, and grew up in a privileged life. Marilyn and Sam Sheppard had 1 child, and I believe it was Sam Reese Sheppard, and he becomes a central figure later on. But at the time of the murders in 1954, July 3rd, he was 7 years old. So, we are going to start with the victimology of Marilyn Sheppard, and I don't know a lot about it, unfortunately. The police reports do not go into it. Of course, victimology at the time wasn't that important. It has evolved just like everything else in true crime and forensics. But one of the things that I learned was she was a good mother. She was apparently pretty loyal to Sam Sheppard. To what degree, I'd like to know more. Because some of the DNA evidence, yes, I said DNA, I know this happened in 1954, but DNA evidence was done, and we're going to get into that, and some of that makes me go back to victimology, and I wonder how loyal she was. That's the victimology. We're going to jump forward now to time frame and the timeline. And I want to look specifically at July 3rd, 1954. What were they doing? They were hosting a little get-together of some sort. At least the neighbors were there. It appears that there was some alcohol involved, at least on the neighbor's part, because in their interview they said that they had drank a little before they came over. Now, I believe in Marilyn's autopsy, there was no alcohol present in her system. Why? She was 4 months pregnant. So, that would be why. At 12:30 a.m., the neighbors who were there visiting are seen out by Marilyn. Sam is asleep on this daybed. He is wearing this brown corduroy jacket, according to witnesses. You see it here folded up nicely there. But he had fallen asleep during watching of a movie. The couples were watching a movie. 12:30 comes. Marilyn shows them out. That's the start of our timeline, because that's the last known time that Marilyn is seen alive. 12:30 a.m. July 4th. At 5:40 a.m., Sam Sheppard places his first phone call, not to the police, but to the mayor, who they are friends with. And he tells them I think they have killed her. Come over, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Didn't call the police. The mayor, in turn, calls his Sam Sheppard's brothers, who are doctors, to come over to the house. The police are called. Now everything's in motion. That's the timeline. That's the timeline that I want to deal with. Because everything previous to 12:30 a.m. is all good. Everything's good. Happy couple. From 12:30 to 5:40, something happens. Okay? And that's what we got to determine. Now, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to try. So, Sam Sheppard, well, let's go to the crime scene. Okay? Because I looked at the police reports and looked at the crime scene photos, I feel a lot better talking. I'm more confident talking about this when I see those things versus when I don't. And you have to kind of guess, and I don't like doing that. Sure, you're guessing a little bit here, but here, your training, at least my training and experience, I can utilize it, hopefully, to tell us something. So, crime scene. Marilyn's bedroom, in which she shares with Sam. As you can see, they have two beds that are kind of together, but there's a little nightstand in between. Take a look at what is not on that nightstand. That becomes relevant. What would you expect to see on that nightstand? Did anybody say it? A lamp. Not there. We'll get into why that may be important later. Marilyn's body. Very important here. She is pulled, in my guesstimation, pulled down to the bottom of the bed, because you have that crossbar that goes across there. Lot of blood spatter, as you can see, on the walls, the door. You can see it here. The entrance door into the bedroom, a lot of blood spatter. What does that tell you? The door was open, okay, during this assault. One of the things through victimology that I would want to know that I didn't see addressed would be, when they went to bed, did they close that door? That would be important. But classic blood spatter. Her hands. You can see the picture here. She has some defensive wounds to her hands. Not from stab wounds. And I'm not sure what to make of these wounds. But they're certainly defensive. There's varying degrees of why her fingernail is ripped off. I would opine that it is from being beat with a blunt object and trying to block the blows. I would maybe expect to find some broken fingers, which she didn't have. But that's not to say it happens every time. And it also depends on the murder weapon. In this case, we don't have a murder weapon, but she died from blunt force trauma to the head. In fact, I think It was said, if I remember correctly, that the blows were not enough to fracture her skull, although I did read that she had orbital fractures. And she died from the hemorrhaging, and she basically drowned in her own blood. Now, again, there's discrepancies on that. So I can't say one way or another. All I can say by this model, and that's what this is just a model of her skull. She had a lot of damage. 27 blows to her head. 27. That's a lot. That is a lot. Clothing. How is her clothing arranged? Very important. Her blouse is pulled up so her breasts are exposed. Her bottom from her waist down is covered by a blanket. When you lift that blanket up, her legs are spread eagled and her pajama bottoms are pulled off to one leg. Now, I'd like to know more about her underwear, if they were included in that. I did not see that. Maybe she didn't wear underwear. I don't know. The sheet was placed there by his own admission by her husband, Sam. He said that he did it because she was modest and he didn't want people to see her that way. That stood out to me a little bit. He certainly did that. But what I would expect to see if he was guilty of this crime is that he would do that. But in my experience, he would cover her face, not the lower half. But the more I thought about that, he would cover the face if he was remorseful. So in this case, if he did do it, maybe he just is not remorseful. But we'll get into whether he did it or not. That is the crime scene. You see it. That's it. You look at the bedroom. No struggle. You look at the dressers. You don't see anything knocked down. In fact, it almost seems like everything is combined or just right on Marilyn's bed. It's right, everything right there. Now, they do find a trail of blood drops going down the stairs and outside. That's going to play a key role in this as well. Sam Sheppard is taken to the hospital because he has some injuries. But let's get into, well, before we get into Sam Sheppard's statement, let's back ourselves out of the bedroom, because sometimes, most times, it is imperative to not focus where the murder happened. The murder room, the bed. You want to gradually work your way into that. Everything on the perimeter and the peripherals of that murder room is extremely important. Living room, kitchen, basement, all those things. That's where you're going to find your clues. So in this case, as you can see in this photograph, Dr. Sheppard's medical bag has been turned up and its contents dumped out. According to him, there is some morphine that is injectable that is missing. You go to his office and his drawers are pulled out. They are stacked on top of each other. If you go to the desk in the living room, you will see drawers pulled out. And if you look at them very carefully, maybe you'll see what I think I see. It appears that the place has been robbed. There was a burglary. That's what the police have to go on. When they interview Sam Sheppard, now they interviewed him there at the scene, and then he was taken to the hospital where he was interviewed again. At the scene, he states that he was asleep on the daybed when he awoke to his wife screaming, "Sam, Sam!" Who does that sound like? That's identical to Jeffrey McDonald. Although not identical, she said Jeff. And this one, Sam, same thing. Both are doctors. A lot of coincidences here. But he hears her scream his name. He runs up the steps. He gets to the room and he sees a figure. And he describes it as like a white figure that is bipedal. That's his words. A very odd choice of words. And he is knocked unconscious. And this is right from the police report, with a punch to the side of his head. Later interview, this changes to he's hit in the back of the neck. When he awakes, and he doesn't know how long he's out, but when he awakes, his wallet is now in front of him. And he checks on his wife. He goes and checks on his 7-year-old son, and then he hears a noise downstairs, as if the intruders are still there. And I say intruders because initially he says somebody was having a go at it, I think. Still having a go was his words, with his wife. And he was dealing with another guy. Later, I think he changes this to he doesn't know if there was two people. Regardless, while he's in his son's room or while he's waking up from his unconsciousness, the person's still in the house. He runs down the steps. He sees the person exiting. He follows them down 50-something flights of steps to the beach, where he believes this guy stops and waits for him, and they tussle again. He knocks him out again. When he comes to, it is now almost daylight. It's starting to become daybreak. His legs are facing towards the water. Remember, they're on the beach. His head is towards his house, but his legs are towards the water. He goes back inside, sees Marilyn, his wife. She's for sure dead. And then he makes a phone call. That's the gist of Sam Sheppard's story. Now, is he telling the truth? Well, I got to be honest with you and tell you, initially, when I read it, and I stopped after 2 paragraphs because I said, this guy is full of shit. His statement made absolutely 0 sense to me. It was almost as bad as Jeffrey McDonald's. Remember Jeffrey McDonald's with Helen Stokely there with a candle saying, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Come on, nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that. In this case, it made no sense to me. They're in a confined hallway space, going up into the bedroom, and he is knocked unconscious by a punch to the side of his head. Now listen, I've been in a number of fights. I've been swung on. I've been hit a lot. I've never been knocked out. No, I'm not saying people don't get knocked out. You see it all the time. I've seen plenty of fights. I've seen street fights where people have gotten knocked out. Without a doubt. Not too many people I saw ever, except in a professional setting, get knocked out by getting hit in the side of the face. The knockout punch is to the chin. Now, the temple, yes. Now, Sam Sheppard, if you look at this photo of his injuries to his right eye, he got hit by something. But he's not getting knocked out, getting punched in his orbital bone in his eye. Unless this guy is a professional boxer at the time. Okay? He gets knocked out a second time on the beach. Now that has changed too. First it was knocked out, and then later on he was choked out. When people say that they got knocked out or they blacked out, it's an excuse. That's all it is. Most of the time. Now, sometimes it can happen, okay? But always remember, possibilities to probabilities. It is very possible that he got knocked out, not once, but twice. Is it probable? He's no small man. He has trophies. He was a football player. He's athletic. Now, just because you're athletic don't mean you can take a punch. But how about this? A guy is beating his wife or has already killed her with an object. She got beat with an object. Why did he not get hit with same object? They're up in the same room. She just screamed, "Sam, Sam, help me." He goes up and he's knocked out with a punch. Why wouldn't the offender hit him with an object? Makes sense to me. So I think the police right away felt pretty much the way I do, or the way I did when I read his statement, and looked at the evidence and kind of said, I'm not buying this guy's story. Let's talk about Sam Sheppard's clothing. He had no shirt on when police got there, and he has no explanation for where it went. His first response when police asked him where his shirt was, he said maybe the guy needed it. Very odd response. But could be a response from somebody that has no idea what happened to his shirt. There is some evidence that backs up his story. You know, so I'm reading the police reports, I'm reading his statements, and I'm thinking, this guy, he's full of shit. His story doesn't make sense. But then all of a sudden, in my brain, I'm like, all right, well, his clothing should tell a story. Okay, the no shirt bothers me. Okay, but his pants, he should have some blood on him. Sure enough, he did. But he didn't have what you would expect. When you look at the walls, and you see what? A tremendous amount of blood spatter. The offender is going to have that blood spatter on him too. Now, the height of the bed could be why he had no blood spatter on his pajama bottoms. He didn't have any. He had look like a smear stain to me on his knee, and he said that was from kneeling to check on her. I don't know if I buy that, because I don't know if you would kneel on the bed to check on her. It's a small bed. It's a twin. Not a king-size bed. But I would expect to see some spatter somewhere on those pants, and I don't see it. I would certainly expect to see it on somebody's shirt. And him not having a shirt bothers me. What else should he have on his clothing? Well, he says he woke up and he was on the beach and the waves were coming in. He should have sand. He should be wet, right? Well, guess what? He was. His pants were damp when police got there. They had sand in the cuffs of the bottom of his pants. Indicative of him telling the truth, right? Maybe. But you got to look for other explanations, okay? There's some things that he could be telling the truth, and there's some things that make you want to think, no, I'm not buying it with this guy. Police recruit some Boy Scouts to look on the property. Remember, you start in, start working out, or you start out and start working in. In this case, they're working out, and they are looking for evidence on the outside of the property. Lo and behold, right off of the steps in some heavy brush, they find a green bag. Inside that green bag are valuable items from the house. His class ring, keychain, his watch. And what do they find when they inspect his watch? Blood on his watch. See, this gets crazy, right? If you would just find that bag, half of you right now are thinking, he's right. Somebody broke into his house, was burglarizing it, wife caught him, killed him, and left, took that stuff with it. It's valuable. Not so fast, my friend. Not so fast. The blood on the watch is Marilyn's blood. Now, there's some things that the police department did wrong, without a doubt. Hey, it's 2022. This happened in 1954. Hindsight is 2020. They let Otto Graham. Now you guys are saying, who's Otto Graham? Somebody out there knows who Otto Graham is. He was a great football player for the Cleveland Browns. Quarterback. He was a neighbor. He seen things happening. He went over there. They let him in. He went up and saw the crime scene. They weren't thinking about DNA, obviously. But they should have kept people out. Right? I mean, they've been doing that since King Tutankhamun died. You don't let people in. So that is a big mistake. Sam Sheppard. Done some things in that house that I think could be indicative of a domestic homicide. But not shortly, 5 years after this murder, another suspect comes to light, which could explain away all of this. And when I read his statements, and I looked into his background, I may have just switched from thinking Sam Sheppard is guilty to thinking he may be telling the truth all along. So Sam Sheppard is arrested for the murder of his wife Marilyn. No weapon was ever found. Not only is he arrested, and it's the trial of the century, he is found guilty. Not of first-degree murder, which is premeditated, but second-degree murder. And he is sentenced to life in prison. Everything is copacetic. Everybody goes on with their life for 10 years. And then Sam Sheppard hires an attorney who is not shy about creating waves. And his name is F. Lee Bailey. Now, a lot of you know him from the O.J. Simpson case. A lot of people don't like him. I had the opportunity, and I was fortunate in my mind to meet him and share some words with him. He is also a Marine. So, as you guys know, I give every Marine the benefit of the doubt. I found him to be very charming, very cocky, very forthright. How I met him, I was at a conference at the Cyril Weck Institute of Forensic Science. He had invited me to come there. I was selling my Unsolved No More book at the time when it first came out. I believe that was 2014, something like that. I have a booth set up. Sitting there signing my books. Michael Bodden was there. Over there. Henry Lee. Cyril Weck, of course. I go to the bathroom. I come back. Somebody's sitting in my chair behind my booth. I'm like, who the hell is this? I keep walking closer I get. I see he's an older gentleman. So my blood pressure goes down a little bit. He turns around and he said, I heard you're a Marine. I said, that's right. And he said, Lee Bailey. I said, kenmains. And we talked for a little bit, and that was my introduction to F. Lee Bailey. So, let's go back to I believe it was 66, maybe 69. In that time frame, F. Lee Bailey is now the attorney for Sam Sheppard. And just like OJ, he believes that he's innocent. He is able to get his conviction not tossed, but and not ineffective counsel. It was that the first trial had too much publicity, and the judge allowed it. The judge made some statements like he's guilty as hell. Not in front of the jury, but he said it. So he was biased, and F. Lee Bailey, being the brilliant lawyer that he is, was able to get a new trial for his new client. F. Lee Bailey has only been practicing law for about 4 years at this time. Second trial goes a little bit different. He's acquitted. He's acquitted a lot because the original trial relied a lot on the testimony of the coroner. See, at that time, the coroners they ran the show. This coroner, and I apologize that I don't remember his name and I didn't write it down here. Starts with a G. I remember that. It's my old timers. I'm getting old. I just turned 48 yesterday. Or day before yesterday. I don't know. After 21, they don't matter anymore to me. But he basically said he's guilty, and he was adamant at the time that this stain on Marilyn's pillow showed the murder weapon. I don't see it. But at the time, he said it was a surgical weapon. Basically, it's something that only a surgeon would have. In this second trial, F. Lee Bailey really brought that up and said, well, where is it? How long have you spent looking for this surgical tool that you said is the murder weapon? And the coroner said, ever since it happened, 10 years. Where have you searched? He said, worldwide. And have you found it? He said, no. Now, I don't know if that sunk the case, But it certainly did not help the prosecution. He's set free. And I believe at the time now he's 40 years old. He gets out. He marries a German woman who he has corresponded with while in prison. And they get married. Soon later they divorce. At age 45, I believe, he signs up to be a professional wrestler. Goes by the name Killer, Sam Sheppard. No, I'm not making that up. I can't believe that. And a year later, he's found on his living room floor dead. He had died of, I believe, cirrhosis of the liver, or maybe liver failure from drinking. He had become an alcoholic ever since this happened, and that's the end of Sam Sheppard. Now, you would think that would be the end of the story, and of course it is not. Because if we fast forward now to the late 1990s, remember Sam Sheppard's 7-year-old son? He now is an adult, and he now wants to clear Sam Sheppard's name. So, he hires an investigative firm, attorneys. They all get involved. They are looking now for DNA. They get DNA evidence. Well, they don't know it's DNA evidence. They get evidence from the case at which the coroner had kept. In those pieces, I think there was 100 pieces, they tested 3 things that I know of. They may have tested more, but what I researched, there was some blood, not spatter, they were drops that led from the bedroom. They also tested some hair of Marilyn's, and they exhumed the body of Sam Sheppard in order to get his DNA, which they extracted from a tooth. 2 of those things very important. You have the victim's DNA, which you're going to find in pretty much anything in that area, crime scene bed, things like that, and the husband's. The husband's you should expect to find as well. It's that outside DNA is what the defense wants to find. The prosecution doesn't want to find that, of course, unless, they're good people and they want to know the truth and not just, hey, we had it right and that's the way it is. Can't be like that. You always got to find out the truth. So in this case, one of the drops of blood was found to have DNA in it of 3 people. Remember when I said back in 1959, another suspect emerged? Well, this suspect's name is Richard Eberling. Mr. Eberling was a window washer. He actually owned a small company, and he worked for the Sheppards. In 1959, he is arrested for a burglary. In this burglary cache of things that he stole, they found 2 of Marilyn Sheppard's rings. That's right. Now, he didn't steal them from the Sheppards that night. He actually stole them from one of Sam Sheppard's brothers. They were in a cardboard box marked Marilyn Sheppard's property. This is according to Richard Eberling, who admits they were Marilyn's. During the course of this interview, he admits, without prompting, well, I should take back, there was prompting. The detective asked him, how did your blood get into, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know his exact words, but it was to the extent, how did your blood get in Marilyn Sheppard's house? Now he's lying, right? Okay, in 1959, he doesn't know. There's no DNA, but there is typing of blood, and we talk about this a lot with old cases. When DNA wasn't available, you typed it. Okay, the victim has type A blood. There's A blood everywhere. You're testing it. Every A, and all of a sudden in the kitchen, oh, there's O. That's important. Someone else was bleeding there. So in this case, in 1959, when the detective is talking to Mr. Eberling, he's saying, hey, how did your blood get there? That's a good detective move, okay? Here's a guy who, I'm talking about Eberling, that admits he was working at the Sheppard home. He has stolen 2 of Marilyn Sheppard's rings. 5 years ago, she's a murder victim. People think Sam is guilty, but some don't. It's still kind of unsolved. A good detective is going to ask a question about that. And he did. And the answer he got blows up everything. Doesn't blow it up in 1959. That doesn't happen until 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, even today. His answer was, to that line of questioning, why is your blood in the Sheppard's home? Which is a lie. He doesn't know that. He's just throwing it out there like fishing to bite. Is he going to get anything? And what does Eberling say? I cut my hand washing the windows 2 days before the murders. That's why. Let me tell you something. As a detective, if you get an answer like that, when you're fishing, it's like landing the biggest fish for the world record. Because now, just based off of that answer, you have a suspect. What a change of things, right? First off, you're a window washer. You're a cleaner. You're going to cut yourself and just bleed all over? That doesn't make any sense, right? It's not even your home. Plus, isn't somebody going to notice that your blood's there? Sam Sheppard would have noticed that, right? Hey, whose blood's here? Unless Marilyn cleaned it up, I don't know. But the whole answer is just odd. So what do? They do nothing in 1959, unbelievably. But in 1997, Mr. Eberling's still alive. They get his DNA. Now let's test it. Remember the drop of blood that they saved and they tested? And I said that there was 3 DNAs. I said it was a mixture. I take that back. I don't believe there was 3. But it was a mixture. And I believe Sam Sheppard was ruled out of that mixture. Richard Eberling could not be ruled out. But before you get excited and say that, hey, he's the man, the statistics was like 1 in 16,000, which is nowhere near the level it needs to be. But what I also found intriguing was there was no mention of a rape kit or a sexual assault even occurring in 1954. But they did do a vaginal smear, a swab, and then you smear it on a slide. And that is preserved. in early 2000s, at the same time, late 1990s, when this was going on, they tested that. And there was a sperm fraction. And there was a mixture. Marilyn Sheppard's, which you would expect, obviously. Sam Sheppard's, which you would expect, obviously. And an unknown. That unknown is reasonable doubt. But when that unknown is tested to Richard Eberling, he cannot be excluded. Again, low statistical, 1 in 16,000, I believe. But nonetheless, now you have two pieces of evidence where DNA cannot exclude them. Sam Sheppard's son sues Ohio. He's trying to clear his dad's name. They have a civil trial, and they basically said, we don't know. Basically, that's what I believe they said. We don't know. We are not willing to declare him innocent. Was his pursuit for justice warranted? Sure. Sure it was. It was his dad. He believed his dad didn't do it. He set out to prove it. Did he prove it? To some people, he did. Am I convinced? Well, let me tell you what I think. I got to admit that in this case, I flipped back and forth on what I thought. A lot of times, most of the time, I err on the side of forensics when I know that those forensics are right. In this case, I'm not sure about that. And what do I mean by that? This is what I mean. You have evidence from 1954. The way things are handled, DNA evidence is handled today is much different. In DNA today, the extraction of DNA I'm sorry, is so purposeful. It is so prevalent. It picks up things that isn't even relevant. I think of those wood chips that were from the stairs that had a source of DNA in it that is unknown. That could be Richard Eberling's. But that wood chip was passed around by probably at least 30 to 40 people. May or may not wearing gloves. Probably were wearing gloves. But did they know that when they wear that glove and they drink that soda, that there's DNA on that can, and now that DNA just went to that glove and then they picked up that wood chip? They didn't know that. They didn't know any of that. I am just not sold on this DNA. Now, the one thing that does concern me in regards to the DNA is the vaginal smear. That bothers me. You could certainly get contamination from that slide, right? You get a box of slides in, you probably don't even have gloves on. There's no reason to. But if that DNA is not from contamination, maybe Marilyn Sheppard was having an affair. Now that is very low in my statistical probabilities. I just don't know enough about her background. It's very hard when you have a victim, especially a female victim who was raped and murdered, for people to talk bad about them, if there is anything bad, or the perceived notion that it's bad. Let's say Marilyn Sheppard slept with 20 guys. Her friends would be very hesitant to say that, even if they knew, because it would make her look bad, especially in 1954. Now, I'm not saying that she slept with that many guys. More than likely, it's contamination from the slides. Or it's from the offender, who isn't Sam Sheppard. That has to be a possibility. Maybe not a probability yet, but it's certainly a possibility. Now, what do I think happened? Well, again, I told you I flip-flopped a lot on this. The scene. The scene has every indication that I look for in a staging. We've talked about staging in other videos and why you stage a scene to make it look like something that it isn't. You stage a scene, let's say, to look like a burglary when in fact it's a domestic homicide. You stage a scene when it looks like a burglary, but in fact it's a drug hit. That's why you stage things. This has every earmark of that. And what do I mean? Well, look at this photograph. That jumped out to me right away. Look at the drawers. They're pulled out evenly, right? They're not rifled through. That looks to me as if somebody is just pulling out drawers to make it look, and maybe swiping some stuff off the top of the desk. That doesn't look like a burglary to me. The medical bag. Look at it again. Would it not be more prudent for the offender to just take that bag with him? Why dump it? And if you did dump it, look at the contents of it. They're not strewn about looking for certain things. It's just in a pile. The 26 blows to Marilyn's skull is also a big indicator of somebody who had a tremendous amount of rage towards Marilyn. That is a lot of overkill. I don't see a burglar doing that. Now, if Marilyn Sheppard was sexually assaulted, sure, that turns the tide a little bit. But then why the burglary? If sexual assault was the motive, why the burglary? Sure, certainly burglary could be secondary. We've seen that before. The main motivation, the intent, is the assault. But hey, while I'm here, let me look for something. I don't buy that here. You know why I don't buy that here? Because you got somebody else in the house. You got two people in the house. Now, if sexual assault was the motive, which could be, kind of has the indications of that, right? Pants are pulled down, shirt's pulled up. I don't see it. I don't see it. You are not going to sexually assault somebody when there's another individual in the house. Now, hold on a second. I know what you're saying. Golden State Warrior or Golden State Killer did it. BTK did it. Richard Ramirez did, yes. But what do all of those have in common? The other person that was in the house was incapacitated, meaning they were tied up, they were forced to watch, whatever it was, they were under control. In this case, Sam Sheppard's not under control, right? By his own admission. He is not discovered until he runs up the steps where he's met and knocked out by a punch to the side of his head. At that point, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, now they know he's there. They didn't know he was sleeping on that daybed. Okay, they didn't know. Because there's another set of steps that go up to the top, and they used that, and they never saw him. Let's say that that is what happened. He hits him and knocks him out. Why not incapacitate him right then and there then? If sexual assault is your motive, tie him up. Or, better yet, kill him. Then you can spend as much time with the victim as you want to spend. The offender doesn't do this. Instead, he hits him with his fist instead of the weapon that has created all this damage to this girl. But you're going to use your fist instead. Well, somebody out there is going to say, well, maybe he lost it, the weapon, during the assault. Yeah, possibly, but there's no indication of that. There's no indication of that. Instead, this offender is going to let him get up, essentially. He doesn't even leave the house, according to Sam Sheppard. He goes downstairs and he's doing stuff downstairs, rifling through the house. Now, does that make sense? You just murdered this victim. Her husband comes up the steps. You knock him out with a punch. You flee the house. He's going to stay around, try to burglarize the house, knowing that that guy's not dead. You didn't hit him with a weapon. You just punched him. You don't think he's going to get up and come down after you? The story makes no sense. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. It's possible there's a unicorn running around in these woods out here. It's possible. Okay? It's just not probable. That's what I see. Now, some of the stuff that he says, like I said, with his clothing and stuff, has merit. One of the biggest red flags to me, though, is the shirt being missing. Now, I know they found a shirt later on, but it didn't have any blood on it, and they found one a couple years later. But they're on a beach. You don't think they're going to find millions of shirts? Come on now. Him not having a shirt on is indicative of two things. One, if there was a struggle, the first place a woman is going to go for in a defensive posture is to grab that shirt. And it probably ripped. Secondly, the blood spatter is going to be evident all over that shirt. So it's a piece of evidence that's got to go. It has to go. And it did go. And where did it go? Well, I don't know. I do know that more than likely, Sam Sheppard did go down to that beach. Now that bothers me a little bit because I think he went down there in order to get rid of the murder weapon. And I don't know what it is. Late 2000s, the police put forth a scenario that it was a lamp. Remember we talked about the nightstand in between the two beds? They had somebody testify that the Sheppards had them fix a lamp, and that's where it was, and it's missing. I got a problem with that scenario. if a lamp was used, what's the one thing that you would find, without a doubt, in that bedroom? That's right. Light bulb glass. It would have busted the glass. Now, you always have these people that want to throw shade at it and say, well, maybe it didn't have a bulb in it. Kenny, did you ever think of that? Yes, I thought of it. But think of this. If the Sheppards paid somebody to have that lamp fixed, don't you think that they would have a bulb in it because now it's working? Come on, you got to use your head a little bit. So I don't believe a lamp was used as the murder weapon. What do I think the murder weapon was? I have no idea. I know one thing it wasn't. It wasn't fists. Now, I've talked a lot before in other videos about a weapon of opportunity. Usually in domestic homicides, when somebody snaps, think back to Jeffrey McDonald with the wooden slat and the ice pick, things from inside the home. So, if Sam Sheppard was responsible for this, I would expect the weapon to be from inside the home. The reason he would have went to the beach, I believe, is to get rid of that weapon. In addition to get rid of that weapon, you would also get rid of that shirt. Now, I mean, I wouldn't expect him to just throw a shirt into the lake because, chances are it's going to come back and land on shore. A heavy object like a pipe, flashlight like I have heard before, things like that, yes. And the reason the bottom of his pants were damp is because he walked out into that surf. The further you get out there to throw the object, that's what I believe happened. The police did find wet marks, at least 2 places on the step, outside, and also on the inside of his house. So we know that he was wet. Backs up his story that he chased a bushy-haired intruder down those 50 flights of steps, fought him, got knocked unconscious again out on the sand. So it does support his story a little bit, but I think my scenario, and probably a lot of other people's scenario, would match up a little bit more. You ask yourself, why doesn't he have a shirt? I mean, to me, that's pretty big. Let me get to my notes. I've got a lot of notes written down here. And the reason I write notes is because when I'm researching something, when looking through police reports, if something doesn't make sense, I want to write it down so that way I don't forget it. One of the things that continually went through my head is the defense, not in 1966 when F. Lee Bailey had it, but I want to say, or they weren't the defense, or the plaintiffs in the year 2000 or 1997 when Sam Sheppard's son sued Ohio. They contended that the blood drops that were leading from the bedroom all the way outside, down the steps and all that, were from the offender cutting himself. Well, they think that what happened was, oh, and I forgot to mention this, there's so many things, and this is very intriguing. I have it written down, so I'd have got to it. They found 2 teeth, 2 fractured, chipped teeth that was Marilyn Sheppard's underneath her body when they removed her. The plaintiffs, who are blaming Richard Eberling, stated that during the sexual assault, he had placed his hand over her mouth. She bit him, which he apparently had told somebody, that bitch bit me. And he removed his hand with such violent force that it pulled her teeth out and fractured them. Now, I don't buy that at all. But that puncture wound is responsible for the blood drops leading out. Now, the problem I have with that is the prosecution back in 1954, when this happened, stated those blood drops were from the removal of the murder weapon. So whoever, in this case, they believe Sam Sheppard, kills his wife with this murder weapon, leaves the room, and blood is dripping off of that. 1997, they say, no. That is from the offender bleeding. Well, who to believe? Well, let me ask you this. Wouldn't there be 2 blood trails leading out of there if Richard Eberling was bitten and that's his blood drops leading out of the house? Well, where's the murder weapon? Right? The murder weapon has to get out of the house. In order for it to get out of the house, more than likely, it's going to have to drip blood. That's what I think. 2 chipped tooths. Teeth. That shows violence. I don't see that as somebody pulling their hand away. I just, scale of 1 to 10 on believability, honestly, I would give that a 1. I'd give it a 1. If there's an odontologist that wants to tell me differently, I'm open to that. But just, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think it's more indicative of somebody getting beat with an object and breaking her teeth. Now, supposedly the outside of her face did not show that, because there was no cut on her lip or anything. I don't know. Okay? I did read Cyril Weck's involvement, and you all know how I feel about Cyril Weck. I love the man to death. He's done so much for me and treated me so well during my career. He believes, from what I read, and this was from many years, and I don't know if his theory has changed, but he believes that Sam Sheppard is innocent. He does not believe about the bite mark, though, from what I read. And I'm on board with him with that. Back to the notes. I have number 1, the med bag staged. We talked about that. Now, this is why it's always great to go back through things. I originally wrote with big stars here. The daybed, as you see here, is right next to the steps going up to the murder room. I wrote, it makes 0 sense for anybody to walk past a sleeping Sam Sheppard to go up those stairs to kill somebody. That right there told me right off the bat, he's lying. But then when I went back through it, I realized there's 2 ways to get up to those steps up to the murder room. So you can scratch what I just said about that. Obviously, Marilyn was the target. 27 blows, rage. There is definitely overkill there. And by overkill, what do I mean? More blows than what is necessary to kill the victim. Crime scene staged, I have. The drawers are not rifled through. I also put, of the crime scene, I would expect him to cover her head with the blanket. Now, where did that blanket come from? That's another question that I have. Sam Sheppard said he took that blanket and covered her lower area up. Well, where did he get that blanket? Was it from his bed? Was it from underneath her? Just curious about that. Motive, I have a question mark. Then I have infidelity. That was the prosecution's theory. He was sleeping with numerous girls. One of them he testified that he did not sleep with. They brought her to trial and she said they were having an affair for a good amount of time. Is that the motive here? I mean, I guess it could be. But I would not say definitely. I would not see it. Because to me, it looks like she was killed in that bed when she was sleeping. I know she has that one defensive wound, but it doesn't look like an argument took place. Now, how do I mean? That's a bad analogy. It's a bad choice of words. There's no struggle in there. She certainly could have been arguing with him why she laid in bed, but usually it's face to face and there's some pushing, there's some shoving. I just don't see that here. So I don't know. That really bothers me, that it looks like everything was contained to that bed. Because if Sam Sheppard did it, I would expect it to be a rage killing, much like Jeffrey McDonald's. Not a premeditated act. Like he was sleeping downstairs, he decided to come upstairs, sees his wife sleeping, and decides, you know what? I'm just going to kill her and start bashing her head in. That doesn't make sense, right? The timeline. Okay. The time of death is never exact unless you have a camera pointing, and even then you don't know for sure if the victim died. Back in 1954, you're counting on lividity, you're counting on rigor mortis. And because of those two areas, the coroner is able to say that he believes that she died around 4 a.m. If that is the case, he doesn't call, by meaning Sam Sheppard, doesn't call for help until 5:40 a.m. It's an hour and 40 minutes. Could he have been knocked out that whole time? Sure. Could he have been staging the scene? Sure. But that's a big gap. I mentioned she was pregnant. By all accounts, they were happy about this kid. But what you portray to the outside world is not necessarily what's going on inside that house. And maybe Sam Sheppard wasn't happy about that. We don't know. Only he knows. Could that have been the motive for murder? Yes. We've seen that time and time again. Maybe it was that simple. He didn't want to have the baby. She wouldn't get rid of the baby. Could be. Not saying it. It certainly is possible. Now the bag of jewelry. Remember that was found out in the brush. What to make of that? I don't see that as a burglary. Because the offender would take it. If he's taken the time. See, that bag was found, I believe, in Sam Sheppard's desk drawer, or at least in that office. The stuff inside it was these tools here that were dumped out and inserted the valuables. To me, that is another attempt of staging. So what do I mean by that? Sam Sheppard, if he did this, is staging the crime scene, and he says, I got to make it look like a burglary. I have to remove items that are worth something. So he takes the ring, puts it in there, the keychains. I'm expecting that those keychains are to his vehicles, but I don't know. And the keys on the keychain, his watch, puts these in the bag, puts them out there in the brush, underneath the brush. From what I understand, it wasn't found on top of the brush. That's a big difference. And why? Because he doesn't want to lose those things. They're valuable. They're important to him. But he has to make it look like it's a burglary and something valuable was taken. And his plan is to retrieve those items later. That makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Makes more sense to me than a burglar taking the time, putting those items in there, when those items could essentially fit in somebody's pocket, and he doesn't take it. He goes down those steps and throws it into the brush. That makes absolutely zero sense. Speaking of the watch, look at the time that is on the watch. 5 o'clock. To me, that is consistent with the staging. The blood is on there. That tells me Sam Sheppard had that watch on when he possibly killed his wife. He also, not only does it have blood on, there's water in it. Did that watch stop at that time? Because that's when he went into the lake to get rid of the murder weapon, and the watch got wet. I don't know. I don't want to jump to that conclusion, because maybe that watch was working the whole time, and eventually when the battery died, when the picture was taken, it showed 5 o'clock. I don't know. But that 5 o'clock that's shown on the watch is certainly consistent with the timeline, right? 4:30, 4 a.m., the time of death. 5:40 is when he makes his first phone call. So that 5 o'clock falls into that staging time frame when he could have been doing it. His wallet is in his pocket at the hospital. It had $3 in it and a $1,000 check. I found that odd because later he said he had some cash that was like $50 or $60 removed from his wallet. Why wouldn't the offender just take the wallet? You're going to remove that money and leave a $3 bill in there and a $1,000 check? That doesn't make sense. He had socks and shoes on. I found that a little odd too. Right? You're at home. You're asleep on the couch. You have your shoes on? Because when they find you, it says here you had socks and shoes on and they were wet. Maybe the shoes that they're talking about are slippers, possibly. But it's July 3rd. Your feet aren't going to be cold. Just find it odd that he had shoes on. Don't you? You're in your own house. You're already asleep. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. No t-shirt. I wrote that. Talked about F. Lee Bailey. Her blouse not being ripped. If there was a struggle and there was a sexual assault that took place, I would certainly expect that blouse to be ripped. Not pushed up like that. That being pushed up, to me, and I've seen many cases like this, where it was simply staging. So in this case, you're overstaging things, right? So you have an offender who is maybe book smart, but not smart in crime scene elements, and you're overstaging it. And what do I mean by that? Well, downstairs, you're making it look like a burglary, okay? Pulling out desk drawers, medical bag. But upstairs, in the murder room, you're making her body look like there was a sexual assault. Her legs were, somebody pulled her down between that crossbar. You can't sexually assault somebody the way she is right there. Now, certainly, maybe the sexual assault happened, if it did, previous, but then why would you find it necessary to pull her down like that? That makes absolutely no sense. but it makes sense if somebody's staging it. Broken teeth under her back. That bothers me because I don't know how it got there. If it got underneath her back, that would mean to me, it's a small bed. She had to be upright at some point in time for those teeth to get under her back. That's the only way it can happen, right? And if that's the case, then that leads more to an argument that took place. Her watch was found on the floor of Sam Sheppard's office. Now, the police report that I read, the police officer said he found it on the desk in that office. But everywhere else I see, it says it was on the floor. And in fact, this photograph here shows it on the floor. It had blood on it. It was Marilyn's. Why is that there? Why did somebody take that off? If it was the offender who was robbing the place, wouldn't he take it with? But look, now this just occurred to me. Look where it's at, next to those tools. As if that was going to go into that green bag as well. Just like Sam Sheppard's. See? I love talking this shit out with you guys because it makes more sense now. The offender dumps out all the tools that were in that green bag. And what does he put in there? Sam Sheppard's watch, his ring, his keys. Needs something of Marilyn's. Robbery. Goes back upstairs. Takes her watch off. Goes to put it in there, but something distracts him. Right? Something happens. But that watch does not make it into that bag. And it lays right there. I love, see? I originally was just going to say, I don't know, why that, her watch, which had blood on it, as you would expect, is laying on that floor. But now, after talking it out with you guys, it makes perfect sense. That's where he put all the valuables, was right there. And for some reason, he didn't put in Marilyn's, something distracted him. Something happened where he didn't put that watch in there like he wanted to. He wanted to. Okay. Sheppard originally said he saw two men. He was knocked unconscious by a single blow, a fist to the side of the head. I already talked to you. I just find that improbable. It's possible. It certainly is not probable. If he was hit by an object. Look, just think about that. Look at the viciousness of her. But yet, that viciousness, now you're being confronted by not Marilyn Sheppard, a small, petite woman. Now you're being by an athletic doctor who is 185 pounds, and you're not going to use that weapon on him? Instead, you're going to use a fist? And if there was two people, so some people are going to say, well, maybe the first guy, there was two guys, one was up in the bedroom, and the other one is the one that hit him. Why wouldn't the other one come and help too? To take out the bigger threat. His injuries. He had a concussion and a possible fractured neck. This was diagnosed, from what I saw, by his family, his brother. Now remember, they came to the scene. Originally, somebody said, the brother, that he had a fractured neck. In other reviews of the x-ray, the fracture was not there. He does have an injured eye. His face, I see it. Something hit him. Surely wasn't the weapon that Marilyn was killed with. It certainly wasn't a punch, because he said he got hit on the side of the head that knocked him out. You think maybe that was from a punch from Marilyn? Wet footprints on the concrete we talked about. No forced entry I saw, but then again, I did read a report where there looked like there was tool marks on the basement entry, and that is where Richard Eberling said he drew a diagram and had that on there. And if you came in that way, you could certainly go up steps and not be seen by a sleeping Sam Sheppard. I just don't know how old that forced entry was. And if it was forced open with a tool, a crowbar, wouldn't it remain open? I don't know. Maybe you would close it. But you didn't come back out that way. You were chased out. Sam Sheppard said he chased him out the door, not through the basement. The missing morphine, I just think is more red herring. Yeah. But two witnesses said they saw a bushy-haired man, and they gave a description, and they did a sketch of it around 4 a.m. near the Sheppard's home. Now, what to think about that? Well, I think it's possible. Richard Eberling does not have bushy hair. Every photograph I see of him, never had bushy hair. But then someone says, well, he was known to wear wigs and toupees all the time. Well, okay. But don't you think that would have came off during the struggle? Don't you think that Sam Sheppard would come out of his bedroom holding a toupee and say, hey, the offender left this? The expert, I want to say his name is Kirk. He's a blood spatter expert, I believe. Came to the conclusion that the offender was left-handed, based on the pattern of the blood spatter. I mean, I don't know how he could tell that. You know, if you have high velocity spatter compared to drops, and the tails being elongated on the drop, you know, I certainly am not going to question his expertise. But from what I saw from the victims, the model of her injuries, to me, I would say the direct opposite, that the offender was right-handed due to the blows and where they're located. So that's it. The fascinating case, the trial of the century, the first one. Sam Sheppard. Tragic tale. Tragic tale. I will not give a definitive answer, because if I thought there was a definitive answer, I'd give it. But I see things definitely both sides. And what I will do is see where the weight goes. To me, the totality of everything, I believe that Sam Sheppard was most likely guilty of this murder. I think the big thing now is that he's innocent. I think most people believe that. But I think the interpretation of the DNA evidence is being overvalued. And by that, again, I do not like to throw contamination out there. But I've seen it happen. It's happened in my cases. a murder case that I had. You know, lab said, hey, you're looking for a female offender. It threw me all off. I'm like, what? Because I sent them blood from the crime scene. And I chased down all these leads looking for a female offender. I've changed my whole course. I'm thinking, man, I was wrong on this. I was wrong on that. And then months later, they call and said, we made a mistake. There's contamination at our lab. Just a state lab. The Pennsylvania State Police Lab. And you cannot rely on that. And when I tried to question them as to, well, what do you mean? You know, am I still looking for a female? Well, we can't discuss it any further. It was so frustrating. So frustrating. Because all that did, I mean, it did a lot of things, but now it introduced reasonable doubt into my case. And it's something that I don't think the new detectives that have took over the case are going to be able to overcome. Because it's going to show incompetence to the jury by the lab who does all the work. So, again, I don't like to throw contamination out there because I think that's a scapegoat. People who are tunnel vision on a certain suspect, and when DNA is introduced and it points away from that guy, they'll throw contamination out there or something to that effect, and I don't like that. But in this case, I would say that the statistics are not there to liken their suspect, Eberling, to the crime. He can't be excluded, but there's millions of other people that can't be excluded from that either. 1 in 16,000 is not great. 1 in 100,000 is not great. Okay? I think Eberling is a great suspect. I think his background, his history of violence, he killed before by beating somebody, a lady, about the head. It was an elderly lady, but nonetheless. He's a good suspect. And him saying that about the blood drops and he cut himself. And they looked into his alibi, and I think that it was proven bogus. Maybe he was afraid that they were going to pin the murder on him. I don't know. Or maybe he's guilty of it. It's certainly possible as well. But I don't think the DNA evidence is going to prove that. I'm wondering if, and I think I discussed this before, if Marilyn Sheppard was having an affair. Her victimology would tell you that. I didn't see any indication of that, but the sperm fraction from the smear is indicative of somebody other than Sam Sheppard. And that could have been from a sexual assault, but we went through why I don't think that it is a sexual assault. Somebody moved her body down there. There would be no reason to do that if this was a sexual assault. So if you look at the totality of everything, to me, it leads to Sam Sheppard. But there is certainly, in my opinion, reasonable doubt, and I would have never convicted him. I would go as far as say, I don't know if I personally, if it was my case, at that time, would have arrested him. And he could be guilty. He more than likely is, after I look at everything. But still, I'm a firm believer in not arresting anybody till you're 100%. Now, some people say, and they've told me this, you're wrong. You don't have to be 100%. You just have to show probable cause. Let the jury decide. I don't operate like that. Again, because your life could be ruined. And if he is innocent, wasn't his life ruined? He became an alcoholic. 2 weeks after the conviction, his mom shot herself in the head with a shotgun. Dad died of a heart attack not long after the mom committed suicide. He drunk himself pretty much to death by the age of 46. That's younger than I am right now. That's sad. That's sad. And I make fun of the name, Killer Sam Sheppard that he used for professional wrestling. But was he manipulated into using that name by a promoter who said that will draw in more and he needed money? I'm sure it wasn't his idea to come up with that name. So am I empathetic to Sam Sheppard? Yes. Yes, I am. But still doesn't change my mind that the crime scene was staged. His answers to questions, his statements were far-fetched, and I don't believe him. And to me, it had every indication that it was a domestic homicide. Everything that I said. You're not going to leave the biggest threat almost completely uninjured. Fractured neck? Yeah, maybe. Depends on who you talk to. Definitely was punched in the eye. But look at her. Look at the brutality that they went through to take her life. And he's just going to have those minor injuries. And yes, I'll say that they're minor. I'll say it. The totality of everything points inside that house, to me. And you're going to have people disagree, and that's okay. That happens all the time. I just want to make sure that I've covered everything that I wanted to in regards to why I think that he more than likely is guilty. But I want to show light on why he's not as well. Because the people that believe that he's not guilty have good reason to believe that. And I want to make sure that I talk that out as well. Another thing that I always wondered when I was looking at the overall aerial of the house and where it happened is why the offender chose to try to navigate down all those steps in the dark to the beach where there's no escape. And by no escape, I mean you only have two ways to run, left or right. You can't go out into the water, but yet if you went out the other direction, you have more opportunity, more areas to get away. Does that make sense? You don't have to navigate 50, 60 steps in the dark. You just run on flat land. A lot of questions in this case. A lot of questions. Okay, well that's it. I covered everything that I can. And if something else comes to me, I'll do an update on the case. But this is a very crazy case. One that was very popular in the 50s and 60s and continues today. My heart goes out to the victim's family. Sam Sheppard, who tried to vindicate his father. Gotta remember, this guy lost his mother too. And then he had to exhume his dad, which is not an easy thing to do. So, to everybody that was touched by this tragedy, my heart goes out to you. And, hopefully, police do a better job. And I think we've learned about not letting people trample the crime scene and the collection of evidence. And not to always have tunnel vision. To keep it open. This had no rabbit holes to go down, which was great. The only thing that you have to determine is, was it from inside the house or was it an outside offender coming in? And I think both had pretty equal merit coming into this, but when I went out of this, I certainly leaned towards it, inside the house. The offender being inside the house. And there was only 2 people inside that house that I believe, the 7-year-old boy and Sam Sheppard, the father. You can eliminate the 7-year-old boy, and it leaves only one person that could have staged the crime scene to make it look like a sexual assault upstairs, make it look like a burglary downstairs, and I can tell both of those are staged. It's not as it looks. It just isn't. And there's only one reason to do that. Draw the attention away from what it really is, and in this case, a domestic homicide. My opinions, kenmains, Unsolved No More. So with that, Mains out.